Hello, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
And I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you, Eric.
Hey, Bob, here we go again. We're going to take another look at what's in the news, hopefully with a lot more analysis and less, more light and less heat. Top of the news still, of course, is Ebola and the different and various reaction to it in the United States of America, locally, nationally.
Right, and the coverage of the press, good and bad.
Yes. Let's wait to get into that a
Right.
little bit because, but actually, press coverage does have a lot to do with some of the general panic that's being caused within locally, and I say locally because, as you well know, my neighborhood actually in New York City is Ebola ground central.
Exactly. As we're taping this, we know that the 5-year-old who was suspected of having Ebola doesn't, but the doctor who is tested positive is still undergoing treatment. And as I found out a couple of days ago, he lives not just close to you, just dead on in your neighborhood. So you're dealing with it directly.
He is a block and a half away from my residence in Hamilton Heights / Harlem. And so the interesting thing is my neighborhood does not seem to be in any state of panic as a result.
That's good.
That's good, but I can't quite say the same for the elected officials in the state of New York and New Jersey. But a part of the reason why I think there's been a general panic, besides the poor media coverage, has been some of one or two of those healthcare professionals and their, what do you call it, Bob? Cavalier attitude?
Right. It seems to me they're kind of cavalier when it comes to themselves. They're willing to talk about what Ebola is, what the treatment is, and how you would recover from it. But the healthcare, at least two of them, two of the healthcare professionals who tested positive seem like, who started to show symptoms, let's put it that way, did not take what I would consider proper precautions to make sure it didn't get out in the wild, just in case it did. They did end up testing positive.
It's interesting you call it proper precautions, and I just basically boil it down to common sense behavior.
Okay.
Because the doctor that lives in my neighborhood, he basically was feeling kind of sluggish, and I don't know whether he had a slightly elevated temperature, but he was feeling kind of sluggish. But because he just said, all right, it doesn't matter that I've been in an Ebola zone, maybe if I go out and work out, I might not feel so sluggish. So he went for a jog, and then he went bowling.
Correct.
And then he took a ride on 2 subways, as most of you already know. But for me, that's not common sense behavior if you've just been in a zone that you know has an infectious disease that you've been helping to cure.
That's precisely my point.
Yeah.
He knew where he was, he knew what the danger was, and he knew about the 21-day period before you're absolutely clear.
Right.
And at least, I would think if I was a healthcare professional, I would at least take it easy. Self-quarantine for 21 days, I know that's hard. Now that sucks.
Yeah.
That's just a bad way to live. But you've been in an Ebola zone, and you're not taking the proper precaution, and you're not, like I said, you're being a little cavalier by doing all that.
Little common sense behavior. And so, of course, with that not too common sense behavior on a couple of healthcare professionals, the panic quotient then raises itself. And so now the other Ebola healthcare professionals that have the guts and the courage to go to that infected area to try to treat the affected individuals in West Africa, they come home now, and because the other people haven't been behaving too well, as you both, most of you have seen, the governors of New Jersey and New York decided they would just slap an automatic 21-day quarantine on these healthcare professionals. And they weren't initially saying home quarantine, this was just quarantine. And the governor of New Jersey, Governor Christie, through this particular nurse who came back into some sort of tent facility outside the airport in Newark somewhere,
Right.
in some area near Newark, and basically she wasn't even allowed the benefit of whatever, home self-quarantine, 21-day,
Right.
keep an eye on yourself.
And it turns out it was entirely medically unnecessary, the level of quarantine that she was thrown in. I guess she's back in Maine self-quarantining at an undisclosed location as we record this.
Yeah, the interesting thing, which you and I have commented on, is how the winds of public opinion seem to be affecting these decisions, where the panic level raises its head, its ugly head, then all of a sudden we have to get real strict on Ebola quarantine. And then when people say, but that's not really on the basis of any, or the nurse herself starts making phone calls with her cell phone saying, these people are crazy over here, I don't know what they're doing. And then there's public outrage about the way she's being treated. Then it's, oh, well, maybe we can let her go home. Look, Dr. Fauci, Center for Disease Control head, not the NIH or one or the other, I forget. Fauci said, look, you got to base these decisions on the actual medical and scientific knowledge that we have. You can't just arbitrarily say, okay, you got to be quarantined because you've been over there.
Right.
A lot of people were there, as Doctors Without Borders have said, they're treating 4,500 people with, I forget how many rotating cadres of doctors, 150, 200, depending on who volunteers, and they've had 23 confirmed infections
Okay.
of that, and basically I don't believe how many lives. I think maybe 2 or 3 healthcare professionals in West Africa have died
Right.
from that. So there is really no need for us to panic if they follow the correct protocols, if they get the correct equipment, because there have been some reports and now coming out from Homeland Security that they're dealing with outdated hazmat suits, they're dealing with inefficient,
We're actually
insufficient stuff that makes people want to wonder, well, are they really adequately prepared for this? And if they're not, how long will it take them to get adequately prepared?
No, you're right. We're actually learning as we go in terms of what we need in terms of real hazmat suits and real disinfection procedures. In other words, you work in teams. One person disinfects the other and then helps each other with the hazmat suit off. Some of these procedures have been tweaked and improved upon. But just what you said, Bob Herbert on, I guess he operates, he's on a network called opedtv.com.
All right. So
and
this is one of the online sites.
Yes, but it was on Channel 13 WNET the other night, and obviously archived online. But he interviewed the dean of the CUNY School of Public Health, Dr. Ayman El-Mohandes, and he basically said panic is not a product of knowledge, and that the city was, as he saw it, was taking the appropriate precautions, and this was taped even before we knew there was the doctor infected in the city. And Bob Herbert himself talked about some of the marginal journalism that we've seen in reporting this and making sure the people, viewers and readers, had what they actually needed, not just the big blaring headlines, Ebola. I mean, the information that they really need. Like you said, you're not the least bit afraid to go home tonight, even though they don't know. They say it's not airborne, and it probably is not airborne. And basically, they need to study it and take whatever precautions. But I refuse to panic just because the doctor lives in my neighborhood, and it looks like the rest of the people I see walking around in my neighborhood are totally not in any state of panic. So the rest of the city, and I think the rest of the country, needs to just suck in its gut and just act with a little common sense and not get carried away. But
the interesting thing,
of course, you know what one of the key problems is. What happens next Tuesday?
It was election day.
Right.
Yeah.
And that adds to the fire.
Well, a lot of people are posturing and positioning themselves.
Right.
In the upcoming midterm elections, you got people screaming, "Oh, we're under attack from ISIS. Oh, we're under attack from Ebola. Oh, we're under attack. The sky is falling. The sky is falling." And so let's blame whoever is in office. And that's basically the same Chicken Little kind of,
Sure.
"Oh, vote for me because I'm not in office, and you vote for me, I'll solve the problem."
Absolutely.
And that probably goes to why some of these governors were cracking down. I believe the governor of Connecticut actually has the most restrictive edict about people coming back from West Africa being mandatorily quarantined, and that flew under the radar because Connecticut did it so quietly. But my gut feeling is the center of coverage of the Ebola crisis should not be the United States of America. It should be Sierra Leone. It should be Guinea. It should be Liberia. And because those people there are going through tremendous problems, I just don't understand why we're not doing better coverage. Because guess what? Sierra Leone, I believe, Nigeria has gotten their Ebola crisis under control.
Right. I heard that stat the other day.
Yeah.
Right. They've actually mastered it.
Yeah, but it's flown under the radar.
Right.
And so if you would give more public reports on our mainstream media about the fact that one of those African countries that was infected actually nailed it, stopped it in its tracks, and then start to doing some investigative reporting on, how well did Nigeria do this? What did Nigeria do, and how did they succeed in doing that? Boom.
Right. And what was different that allowed them to do it?
Right. And how did that case differ from what's still going on in Liberia? How is Sierra Leone progressing? We have some comparisons there. We do some more. But I shouldn't say if we had, because guess what, folks? It takes courage to go over there as a healthcare professional to cover that story. It equally takes courage to go there as a journalist to cover that story. So rather than say we need to do a better job, actually we can say we need to do a better job. Let's just say, let's hope we get some, like in the old days we had some warhorse correspondents that would go to any war zone. And we have still some very intrepid journalists who go to infected zones to do coverage. What we need to do is get their coverage on our mainstream media in a lot better, a lot more plentiful way.
And I've noticed, and this is through some other reporting that I saw, from country to country to country in that region, the populations are a little bit different in terms of they might have a large transient population here, whereas this other nation, the population doesn't move that fluidly. And some areas, the families are sort of almost nomadic. They move around a lot. And the health care obviously changes as they move, and Ebola moves with them. So it's hard to deal with a moving population like that, depending on which nation, which country you're talking about. That's not as big an issue in others, but that's the type of reporting we're not getting. What are the issues that prevents the healthcare workers from putting a rope around this?
Well, one of the stories that came out dealt with the fact that there are burial customs and funeral customs that actually plays into the spread of the disease, in that if you, for centuries, wash the bodies of your dead before you bury them, no matter what they die of, then it's hard to break that custom when you get hit with an infectious disease like Ebola. So some people early on in certain countries in West Africa didn't stop doing that. And because it's part of their ingrained, you can't move to the afterlife if you don't do this. So they would then be putting themselves at risk, putting their family at risk, and then putting their village at risk by continuing to do those customs. If you don't have healthcare workers who are from the neighborhood to actually say no. And the spirits and the ancestors will allow you to not do this so you don't kill the next generation. Then you have a problem making that barrier, that cordon to keep the infection from spreading. So those are some of the things that you're dealing with, and some of those stories are not being told, but
that's exactly the type of reporting that I'm looking for. That would enlighten us to local customs like that play into the spread, but not accidentally, because of that just happens to be the custom.
But now the word's getting out, you can't keep doing what you've been doing.
Right.
And the interesting thing, what I find is, and the Wall Street Journal actually did a nice take, and there were other outlets that were aggregated that Rafe Kamal sent me a couple weeks ago. One of the smallest countries in the Western Hemisphere, right off our southeastern border, Cuba, has probably sent a larger percentage of healthcare workers to West Africa to help combat the Ebola disease. Not getting much play, not getting, but the bottom line is they've sent a cadre of, I think, at least 150 doctors, not just, nurses and whatever. And part of it is
Now, even during the darkest economic times in Cuba, they've been able to maintain medical schools of pretty reasonable repute. It's not like the medical care has been the teaching, the medical education has been flagging all these decades. But like you say, a much higher percentage of their stock of doctors went over there to volunteer to battle this, and they don't have the resources that the major powers have, yet it's being done. But politically, it's not good news to get shown up like that.
It's interesting. This report, and it was slated. I got this on October 10th, and World News. The headline was "Cuban Doctors at the Forefront of Ebola Battle in Africa," and it was by Drew Henshaw in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and Betsy McKay in Atlanta Connect. And Glenn Gordon from the Wall Street Journal also contributed to part of this aggregation. But they were doing a scorecard on who was helping with this Ebola crisis. And the back end of the report says the UK is sending another 750 personnel to help build the dozens of clinics needed in Liberia and Sierra Leone. The clinics are required to isolate patients from their family members and break the viral chain of transmission. But it isn't clear who will staff those clinics, okay? They're going to build them, but who's going to staff them?
Okay.
Liberia alone needs about 10,000 qualified healthcare workers, and a similar number are needed in Sierra Leone. The U.S. government has said that. So far, the largest single medical brigade is from Cuba in Sierra Leone. Cuba is the only, this is a quote, the only one that I know is responding with human resources in terms of health doctors and nurses, said Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the chairwoman for the African Union and South African President Jacob Zuma's ex-wife. So, a lot of people are stepping up to the plate, but the Cubans are the ones stepping up to the plate with personnel.
With real numbers.
So when our personnel go there to do this, you would think when they come back we would treat them a little better than the governor of New Jersey.
And you were alluding to the fact that these are real heroes. I mean, you're really putting your life on the line. You're really taking a risk in going overseas. I don't care how top-notch the protection is. The danger is all over you at all times. All it takes is a pinprick, and you have a serious problem. But they're going and they're doing a good job. So I give them credit.
You need to treat them right when they come back home.
but we cannot have that cavalier attitude upon their return.
That's true.
You have to take it seriously.
I agree.
We have about 9 minutes.
We've done a lot of Ebola stuff. There are a couple of other things we should update just because. Now, I hope we don't get preempted because I need for us to help make sure the discussion on what's been going on in Ferguson, Missouri does not get sidetracked. Okay. You and I both know that there have been leaks of the, quote, official Ferguson Police Department autopsy on Michael Brown.
Yes.
And as a result of these, quote, leaks, their official autopsies basically was spun to make sure they buttressed the report of the police officer who said that he was protecting himself because Brown had reached for his pistol and therefore he shot at him in defense of his life. Mm-hmm. And so, the spin, of course, is, okay, now the New York Times picks this up and the Washington Post picks it up. I'm not sure the LA Times did, but the bottom line is the story now is there was a struggle in the car. And so therefore the officer really is really in the right. Well, guess what? Maybe he reached for the pistol. As one fairly astute commentator said, well, okay, he's right-handed and the cop's got the pistol on the right and the bullet grazed his right hand and he had to be reaching around the cop's body to try to get that pistol out of that holster. That's a pretty scary reach and contortion of a position. But now, as one of the other people who had analyzed the autopsy, if the officer was trying to pull him into the car and was shooting at him and he raised his hand reflexively, or, he could get grazed that way, right. Okay? But what is left out of the discussion about after the leaked autopsy is when this young man runs away, and I don't know, I heard that audio tape that was played at the time this interaction took place, and it sounded almost like 9 to 11 bullets came out of that weapon.
Right.
And so forget what was happening at the car. If this kid runs away and somebody's shooting at him 9 to 11 times and he stops and turns around and puts his hands up, as I believe at least 3.
A number of witnesses.
At least 3, there may be more eyewitnesses have said. And then he ends up getting shot in the top of his head, which means one of those other bullets possibly, and this is all interpretation, right, could have pierced him, and so he's falling forward when the last bullet hits him in the head. That's the discussion that still needs to be in the discussion.
Right, and the autopsy just gives findings. It doesn't explain exactly what happened. It just talks about residue. It talks about the obvious entry points and exit wounds. Mm-hmm. It talks about things like that, and you can use that information to piece together a scenario. But it doesn't give you the scenario. It doesn't tell you that he was diving for the gun. It just tells you that there is residue consistent with a bullet going off in close proximity.
Close range, right.
That's all it's saying, and I don't like the conclusions that are coming out of it.
And if the blood from that particular graze or from whatever, when he's next to the police officer, actually splatters out, yes, his blood will be on the police officer's uniform. There's no two ways about that. So yeah, there's a lot of spin going on. I understand the Justice Department was not happy with the leaks from the grand jury, and I believe if it wasn't Attorney General Eric Holder, someone in the Justice Department was very adamant with their displeasure about the fact that those leaks were made, and that because of the way they were made, it seemed as if they were leaked with the express purpose of poisoning public opinion in the outcome of the grand jury hearing, and to the point where they were saying this is not acceptable, and
Right, and the same thing happened at the very beginning, where there was very little coming out of. We didn't hear from the officer at all in the beginning, and then we heard from him a little bit, and then we had this sudden rush of support from of course, from the officers, and that's only fair. You're going to support your officer, but from some people in the community who were trying to justify the shooting, and now we have this fresh leak of information that should not be floating around yet, and there's no conclusion that can be made from it. There's just not enough there.
Very interesting, because a lot of the defense attorneys and a lot of prosecutors said that that particular district attorney in Ferguson County, wherever his office is, did not need to go to a grand jury. He could have basically investigated that himself, charge the officer, do whatever he wanted to do, based on eyewitness testimony, the officer's testimony, the whole bit. This grand jury proceedings drags this thing out for months and months. What could have taken maybe 10 days to a week, 2 weeks,
but it
if
takes
his office handled it.
Right, but it takes the pressure off the district attorney, politically speaking.
Yeah, that's the gentleman they asked to recuse himself because he's got a family history, a background of somebody in his family being assaulted by some black person at some point. But he, of course, did not recuse himself. So yeah, there's still a lot of stuff going on in Ferguson that needs to be looked at very carefully. And just because something is leaked to the grand jury doesn't mean we have to buy whatever spin comes out of the result of that leak. We just have to stay focused on the totality of the evidence that's been brought to bear from day one.
Right.
And there have been a lot of eyewitnesses who have testified that that young man had turned around, had his hands up, and was then shot.
And I'm a big proponent of social media and tweeting and what have you, but I don't like tweet journalism, which is what we're hitting right now. The report came out, so all of a sudden there's a new wave of reporting, but none of it tying in, as you just said, the original reporting, talking about the witnesses and the actual.
Unfortunately, it wasn't just the tweeters, because the New York Times piece that ran as a result of the grand jury leak had nothing to do about the earlier testimony.
There was nothing tying it up at the end?
Just the new leaks
I'll have to
and the
look that
officer's
up.
story about the close range struggle, and didn't once mention those eyewitnesses or any of that. It's spin time.
Okay.
And so as Media Watch folks, we watch the media, and so we say, watch out for the spin. Or what was it? Was it give me my Flavor Flav? Don't believe the hype.
There you go.
That was Flavor Flav's thing.
And
Don't believe the hype.
We have about a minute and 15 seconds.
Make sure you dig in for yourself. We may get preempted, so you may not see this next Monday, but if you see it, it's the day before election. I'm going to give you my plug. Go out and vote. I don't care who you vote for.
I agree.
But please go out and vote.
And if you don't vote, you don't matter, quite frankly. Nobody cares if you don't vote.
I got to tell you, they say folks don't turn out unless it's a presidential election. I'm telling you, get out there and vote, because this is how you manage to make the democracy remain a democracy. This has been Media Watch, brought to you by EVT Education Productions and MNN. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And we'll catch you the next time.